The first light of morning crept over Fort Bragg, North Carolina, spilling gold across acres of concrete, steel, and sand. The base never truly slept. Vehicles rumbled through the night, radios crackled with distant chatter, and security patrols rotated like clockwork. But sunrise brought a different kind of energy. It was the hour when the quiet tension of military life collided with the promise of a new day. It was also the hour when reputations were made or shattered. The air was cool, crisp, and faintly tinged with the scent of diesel from armored vehicles lined up in the motor pool. Engines hummed as mechanics tested systems, hydraulic arms moved, and soldiers marched to their first formations. In the middle of this controlled chaos, two figures stood out, not because they were loud, but because of the calm authority in the way they carried themselves. They were two female U.S. Army soldiers walking side by side, boots clicking softly against the pavement as they approached the row of massive beige armored vehicles. They carried no visible rank that demanded attention, no badges that shouted for respect. And yet, something about them made people look twice. Both wore immaculate OCP uniforms, sleeves crisp, boots perfectly tied, hair secured with flawless military precision. But it wasn't their appearance alone that set them apart. It was the unspoken confidence that radiated from their posture. Shoulders squared, steps steady, eyes sharp. For months, whispers had spread across Fort Bragg about two mysterious women recently transferred from a classified assignment. No one knew exactly where they came from. Their records were sealed, their previous postings redacted, their missions blacked out. All anyone knew was that wherever they'd been, whatever they'd done, it hadn't been ordinary. Some soldiers assumed they had exaggerated reputations. Others believed they were sent to the base as punishment. A few, the more experienced ones, suspected something else entirely, because soldiers with that level of discipline didn't just appear out of nowhere. As they approached the motor pool, sunlight hit their faces, revealing expressions of focus and quiet determination. This was their first official morning on the base since arrival, their first chance to observe, to understand the atmosphere, to feel out the people around them. They were calm but not careless, relaxed yet ready. Nearby, a handful of younger soldiers paused their work to steal glances. "Those the new transfers?" One whispered, "I think so." Another answered, "Heard they came from some special assignment." "What kind of assignment?" The first soldier shrugged. "Dunno, but look at them. They're not regular." Their hushed voices weren't hostile, just curious. But the whispers spreading across the base had already begun to evolve into rumors that would grow louder as the day went on. Meanwhile, the two women reached an armored vehicle, a towering machine with thick steel plating, reinforced windows, and tires nearly as tall as they were. One of them gently placed her hand on the metal, feeling the warmth building under the morning sun. "Same design," she said quietly, "but newer tech." Her partner nodded. "Fort Bragg always gets upgrades first." They shared a subtle smile, the kind soldiers exchanged only with someone who understood the unspoken language of experience and survival. Behind them, the base continued to wake. Reveille echoed from distant speakers. Soldiers hurried across the yard with gear slung over their shoulders. A formation leader barked instructions. A Humvee rumbled past, kicking up dust. The women didn't flinch. They absorbed everything around them with sharp, trained eyes. "You ready for today?" one asked, adjusting the sleeve of her uniform. "Always," the other replied, "but I'm not sure this base is ready for us." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't arrogance. It was simply the truth spoken by someone who'd seen enough combat zones, enough failures, enough triumphs to know exactly what she brought to the table. Little did they know, this quiet morning stroll, their calm, collected presence, would become the spark that lit the fuse of an unforgettable chain of events, because somewhere else on the base, soldiers who hadn't yet met them were already forming opinions. Some thought they could challenge them, others underestimated them. A few believed these women didn't belong in their world at all. Fort Bragg was about to learn a lesson in discipline, in grit, in respect. But for now, as the sun climbed higher and their shadows stretched across the pavement, the two women simply stood tall beside the armored vehicle, unaware that by the end of the day, the entire base would be talking about them. And nothing would ever be the same again. By the time the sun had climbed above the main buildings of Fort Bragg, the base was buzzing with a level of interest usually reserved for major briefings or unexpected inspections. Soldiers who had barely noticed each other the day before were suddenly whispering in hallways, leaning closer in the chow line, exchanging quiet, eager glances. And the subject of every whisper, the two new female soldiers who had arrived with sealed records and unreadable expressions. Inside the mess hall, the heart of every army base, chatter echoed between metal tables and stainless steel counters. Breakfast trays clattered, coffee pots hissed, and boots shuffled against the polished floor. Yet beneath the noise, there was a strange tension, curiosity mixed with mild insecurity, the kind that spreads rapidly when people feel they're being overshadowed. Dozens of soldiers sat in small groups, each cluster leaning inward, speaking in low tones. "You hear where they came from?" one specialist asked his buddy as he scooped scrambled eggs onto his tray. "No idea. Their files are locked tight," the buddy replied. "Only high-level command has access." Another soldier, a corporal with a reputation for gossip, joined the conversation. "Someone told me they worked with special operations, real hush-hush stuff." The specialist snorted. "Yeah, right. They don't look SOF." "Exactly," the corporal said, as if confirming his own belief. "If they were elite, you'd be able to tell." But a sergeant sitting nearby, older and wiser, looked up from his coffee. "That's where you're wrong," he said quietly. "The real dangerous ones don't show it. They don't need to." The table fell silent for a moment. Across the room, on the opposite side of the hall, more rumors spread. A pair of young privates hunched over their pancakes. "Did you see how they walk?" one whispered, "like they've been through some serious stuff." "Yeah, I noticed, like, too calm, too focused." And their uniforms were perfect, everything aligned. That's what freaks me out the most. People here don't move like that unless they've seen things. At another table, a group of soldiers speculated in a different direction. "What if they're here for an evaluation?" one suggested. "You mean like spies?" another asked, eyes widening. "Not spies, observers, people who report to command if something's wrong." That scared them more than the idea of special operators. Meanwhile, across the hall, life went on as usual. Soldiers lined up for food, grabbed orange juice cartons, and searched for seats. But no matter what people pretended to focus on, every conversation eventually circled back to the same topic: who are those two? And why were they sent here? Then, just as the morning buzz reached its peak, the atmosphere suddenly shifted, like a wind sweeping through the room, because they had walked in. The two women entered the mess hall quietly, not trying to draw attention, yet every head turned toward them. Instinctively, reflexively, even unwillingly, people looked. Their presence wasn't loud, but it was powerful. Both carried their trays with ease, scanning the room with eyes that absorbed everything in seconds. They noticed the stares, the whispers, the half-hidden curiosity, but they didn't react, they didn't tense up, they didn't shy away. Instead, they walked calmly, choosing a small table near a window overlooking the training yard. Some soldiers tried to hide their staring, others didn't bother. "Damn," one soldier muttered under his breath, "they move like they've been on missions already." Another narrowed his eyes, "Or they think they're too good for us." The remark wasn't malicious, just insecure. The women set their trays down, sat straight, backed, and began eating. Their posture was impeccable, their movements precise. It was obvious they'd been trained in environments where discipline wasn't optional, it was survival. A few soldiers gathered near the drink station, whispering as they stole glances. "Should we talk to them?" One asked. "Bro, don't." Another said, "You don't just walk up to people like that. They'll shut you down." But not everyone agreed. A small group of overconfident soldiers, mostly those who believed themselves to be the toughest in the room, watched with growing interest. Their voices were louder, more arrogant. "They're just soldiers," one said. "Nothing special." "Exactly," another added. "People are making too big a deal about them. We should go say hi." A third smirked. "Welcome them to the base." But the way he said welcome didn't sound friendly. It sounded like a challenge wrapped in fake politeness. They stood up from their table slowly, deliberately, exchanging looks that said they were thinking the same thing. They weren't going to greet the women. They were going to test them. To measure them, to intimidate them. They didn't know it yet, but they had just made the biggest mistake of their military careers, because these two women were not here to compete, not here to prove themselves, not here for attention. They were here because command had plans for them, plans the rest of the base wasn't ready for, and in the next part of the story, the rumor would turn into confrontation, and confrontation would turn into shock. The mess hall door swung shut behind the last group of soldiers as they stepped toward the table where the two women sat. Their boots echoed a little louder than necessary, their shoulders squared more aggressively than usual, and their confidence, misplaced as it was, seemed to beam off them like heat waves on asphalt. The morning sunlight filtered through the large windows, casting bright rectangles across the tables. The two women continued eating quietly, not rushed, not irritated, not even slightly bothered by the approaching footsteps. Their calmness wasn't arrogance. It was the reflexive calm of someone who had seen far worse than a handful of soldiers trying to size them up. As the group of men drew closer, conversations across the mess hall began to die down. Forks paused midair. Soldiers leaned subtly forward. The air thickened with curiosity and tension. Everyone knew what was coming. No one wanted to admit it. The self-appointed leader of the group, a tall, muscular staff sergeant, known for his ego as much as his fitness scores, stopped right in front of the women's table. His friends circled behind him like a pack, waiting for the alpha to make the first move. The two women didn't look up immediately. They finished the bites they were taking, wiped their hands neatly, and only then lifted their eyes. Their expressions were calm, neutral, completely unreadable. The staff sergeant flashed a smile that was more smug than friendly. "Well," he said, folding his arms, "heard we got some new transfers, thought we'd come say welcome." His tone carried the kind of confidence that comes from underestimating someone. The kind that assumes he held the upper hand simply because he was louder. One of the women responded with a polite nod. "Appreciated," she said simply, no fear, no confusion, no interest in playing his game. Her calmness threw him off for a second, but he pushed through with a bigger grin. "You two from around here?" he asked. "No." The other woman answered cleanly. "Just arrived." "That's so," he said, pretending surprise. "Because rumor is you're something special." A few soldiers at nearby tables stiffened. The mess hall had gone quiet enough that even the clatter of utensils sounded distant. The taller woman folded her hands lightly. "We're here like everyone else," she replied, "assigned to this base doing our work." That answer should have ended the conversation, but the staff sergeant wasn't looking for conversation. He pulled out a chair without asking and dropped into it, leaning forward. "So let me guess," he said, lowering his voice dramatically. "Your special operations, right?" The woman raised an eyebrow. "We didn't say that." "Yeah, but you came in here like you own the place," he said. "Walking around like you've been on missions none of us could imagine." The second woman spoke for the first time with a calm, steady voice. "We walked to breakfast. Laughter erupted at a nearby table. Quiet, but not quiet enough." The staff sergeant's jaw tightened. The reaction hit his pride harder than any insult. "You know," he said, forcing a smile again, "a lot of soldiers here earn their place. They show what they can do. How about you two tell us where you came from?" One of the men behind him chimed in, "Yeah, or maybe show us a little something." Another snickered, unless the rumors were exaggerated. The first woman locked eyes with the staff sergeant, not with aggression, but with absolute clarity. "What exactly do you want?" she asked. Her tone wasn't defensive, it wasn't irritated, it was a warning, gentle, controlled, but unmistakable. The staff sergeant leaned back, spreading his arms as if he owned the entire room. "Nothing serious," he said, "just a small demonstration." Some soldiers exchanged glances, others shifted uncomfortably. One young private whispered to his friend, "Why is he pushing them like that?" His friend whispered back, "Because he thinks they're rookies. He's gonna regret it." The staff sergeant continued, unfazed by the tension. "We have a training yard outside," he said. "Show us what you've got." A little friendly challenge. The women exchanged a brief glance. One of those silent, instantaneous conversations only people with deep trust can have. The taller woman finally stood up. The reaction was immediate. Chairs scraped. Soldiers sucked in quiet breaths. Conversations shifted into murmurs. She wasn't tall enough to intimidate him. She wasn't bulky enough to threaten him. But the way she rose, smooth, deliberate, steady, made something cold run down the sergeant's spine. She looked him straight in the eye. "We don't do challenges to entertain," she said softly. "We train with discipline, with purpose." Sounds like a fancy way of saying no. One of the soldiers behind him sneered. Her partner stood up as well, leveling the group with a look that held both patience and danger. "We didn't come here to prove a point," she said, "but if you're truly interested in training, real training, we can meet you on the yard." A ripple of excitement spread through the mess hall. Some soldiers exchanged nervous looks. Others whispered, "Oh, this is going to be good," under their breath, but the staff sergeant heard only one thing, a challenge he thought he could win. He grinned widely. "Perfect, outside in 10 minutes. The two women didn't smile, didn't glare, didn't react. They simply nodded once and walked out. The entire mess hall erupted in whispers, because everyone knew something the staff sergeant didn't. He had just challenged the wrong soldiers. And he was about to learn exactly why the rumors scared people more than they admitted.